Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar tonight, the second in our family engagement series for this year. I'm Sharon Healy, the EXO President, and I'm really delighted to have you joining us here tonight. Tonight, our topic is looking back to look forward, engaging parents in inquiry curriculum, EPIC 2020 to 2023. And we're joined by three eminent professionals in the area, and I'm going to hand over to Amanda Watt in a moment, who will introduce her co-presenters, Dr. Linda Willis and Professor Beryl Exley. But I'm just going to start off with a little bit about Amanda. So she is the Executive Officer of the Queensland Independent Schools Parents Network, and the Parent Network represents the families of more than 141,000 students enrolled in more than 230 Queensland independent schools. They've funded the EPIC research project since 2021 and have seen firsthand the positive impact it has had on participating teachers' pedagogy and in turn the positive change it has brought about for parents and students. EPIC also receives in-kind support from Independent Schools Queensland and Griffith University. QIS Parent Networks is regularly consulted by governments and other peak education groups on policy matters that affect the families of independent school children. So Amanda, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us as one of our hosts tonight.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and hi everyone. I'm Amanda from the Queensland Independent Schools Parents Network, and it's a real joy for us to be here and invited to speak to you tonight. I'd like to introduce Dr. Linda Willis, who's on my right there. If you could give everyone a wave there, Linda, and Professor Beryl Exley from Griffith University, and they'll be leading you through this session tonight. And I'm here to offer some tech support mostly, and I'll jump in every now and again and say a few words in support. Before we get started, we just wanted to officially acknowledge the traditional owners, and I'm doing that on behalf of Independent Schools Queensland, Griffith University and the Parents Network, and we respectfully acknowledge the First Nations people on the land, the skies and the waterways on which we are meeting today. So just a little bit of background before I hand over to Linda. I just wanted to explain that the Queensland Independent Schools Parents Network represents a really diverse sector. So we acknowledge that we're here as guests of AXO today in the state school system. We know that colloquially a lot of people consider independent schools to be private schools, but we always like to point out that independent sector is in fact incredibly diverse. So while we've got large P-12 colleges in the independent sector, there's also lots of small community schools that also specialise in supporting students with disability and or learning difficulties. And there's also been a really strong growth in distance ed schools and special assistance schools in Queensland, which is for students that have disengaged from mainstream schooling. So we feel quite confident with the EPIC research that we're across and representing and assisting diverse schools with this parent engagement work. Thanks, Beryl. So I'll hand over to Dr. Willis.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Thanks so much, Sharon and Di and members of AXO for this wonderful opportunity to present on our work on engaging parents this evening. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, seas and skies on which we're meeting tonight and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Also, thanks so much for that introduction of myself and Beryl. So tonight we'll talk briefly about our parent engagement research journey so far, and that includes EPIC. And we'll describe and explain what EPIC means. EPIC stands for Engaging Parents in Inquiry Curriculum, and it offers a theoretical base and a suite of practices and pedagogies which flow from the theory. And we'd like to also illustrate EPIC tonight with some videos produced by Amanda and her teams at ISQ and QIS Parents Network, which represent key findings from the 2022 EPIC research. We hope to leave about 10 minutes or more at the end for discussion and questions. Thanks, Beryl. So the merits of parent engagement are well documented, and I won't rehearse them here to use words that Janet Goodall often uses, but this slide is a snapshot of the benefits of parent engagement based on the research. And we think it's important to include this simply because sometimes we gloss over it and think that others know this work, and it's an assumption on our part. So it's really important to keep representing the research in a way such as this with a quick snapshot. But the findings highlight the imperative of parent engagement from the perspective of children, families, schools, communities, society generally, and also internationally. So we really wanted to highlight that in terms of the basis for this work, that it's backed by extensive research over many decades. Thanks, Beryl.
We also want to highlight the national priority that is parent engagement, and the priority that the imprimatur for that priority comes from AITS, or the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership. When pre-service teachers graduate and when existing teachers are applying for their career progressions through proficient, highly accomplished and lead teacher stages, they're required to supply illustrations of practice that demonstrate their knowledges and skills around the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers, 3.7, 5.5 and 7.3, and you can read them there on the screen. We also know that the Australian Professional Standards for Principals lend themselves to stellar practices around parent engagement.
Thanks, Beryl. And so we often say another day, another review in education. It feels like that sometimes. And in almost every review, the idea that parents are integral and essential to the work of education, from initial teacher education programs to schools and classrooms, is highlighted repeatedly. And these include the benefits of parent engagement, but also the challenges and the risks of not involving parents in their child's learning. So we've highlighted there with a few take-home messages from some of the latest reviews. The QIS review last year had 2 of its 17 recommendations highlighted the importance of parent engagement. Review of the National School Reform Agreement highlighted some of the challenges and the risks and the contradictions as well. Thanks, Beryl. And then just this week, Teacher Education Expert Panel, we've had, again, some highlighting of the importance of parent engagement, in particular for our initial teacher education programs, the need to provide that foundational understanding of family engagement to maximise student learning based on the best evidence, that family engagement differs at every stage from the early years to senior secondary and so on. So therefore, our ITE students need different strategies. Recognising and supporting family engagement in learning in the home, supporting positive two-way communication, collaboratively planning and problem solving with families, and promoting a literacy-rich environment at home. And then, of course, we have other papers and surveys, and just this week a survey of Victoria independent schools of teachers, for example, which again highlighted some of the challenges for us, that almost half of those surveys found contact with parents among the least satisfying aspects of teaching, and the low levels of teacher satisfaction, the perception that teaching is not ranked very highly amongst professions, and that generally teachers need more support, and that this support will differ teacher to teacher, but the importance of respecting and acknowledging the teachers and the work that they do is linked to this increasing teacher retention. So again, we highlight this tricky space of engaging parents. Thanks, Beryl. So in terms of just having a quick look at our research and how that began, I suppose we typically date that from my PhD research, which focused on parent-teacher engagement, and then work that Beryl and I have done through QUT and UQ in Catholic education schools, where we were particularly at that time, we were focusing on this whole idea of engaging parents and using what was available in terms of social media. And by that, we meant some of the apps that were available at the time, Seesaw, Class Dojo, for example. Thanks, Beryl. And then I was very fortunate to lead some longitudinal research at the University of Queensland for 3 years, which benefited from Education Horizon grant money. And this work really focused on principal leadership for parent-school community engagement, initially focused on disadvantaged schools, 4 schools, which were then extended to 12 schools, most of which were disadvantaged, but it did include what we called advantaged schools. We have a book publication, an international book publication based on the first 4 schools. And it's importantly, we have a parent engagement toolkit of 42 strategies that were signature strategies or unique strategies that fell out of that research. And the link to that is provided there, but happy to provide that link for people to follow up. You will be asked to sign up to an ongoing research project when you go looking, but it's well worth a look to have a look at those 42 strategies. And then following from that, we've been, that just gives a geographic location of those state schools that were involved in that research over those several years. Thanks, Beryl. And then we've been doing a trial of that toolkit, and that's been funded by UQ's Life Course Centre and led by Professor or Associate Professor Jenny Povey, and we're currently looking at some early findings. And what we think is really neat about the findings is that we're seeing some things that really resonate with our EPIC work. The idea that doing the course for schools really generated these rich conversations among staff with a focus on parent engagement, and the need for critical friends to walk alongside schools and teachers in their parent engagement journey. Beryl and I also benefited from some more funding from Education Horizon from the Department of Education in Queensland, and this enabled us during COVID to actually have a look at our past EPIC findings and data and go back and analyse it differently. And so we produced what I think is some of our best work. Unfortunately, it's still embargoed by the department until they release it. But we looked at this whole idea of enhancing agency for students in the early years, and we particularly focused on building towards global competence through effective literacy learning and teacher practices. And why that's important as well is because we really got to focus on this whole idea of well-being, and that has then fed forward into our current work in EPIC. Thanks, Beryl. So the report has got, I think it's around 150 pages. It's got 5 beautiful case studies in it. But something that we can take home now is signature pedagogies that we've really stood out in this area of parent engagement was something we call pilot because it's a bit snappy, but that whole idea of P standing for play, I standing for inquiry, L standing for listening, O standing for others, as in significant others like parents, and T for talking. And we think that that's something that we can continue to apply in our current work as well. Thanks, Beryl. And so to our EPIC work, as Amanda indicated at the beginning, that we've been working with ISQ member schools from 2020 until currently. And you can hear that we've been able to go through the COVID era, but as well through what I think some people call the post-COVID era, although we're still in COVID times. But our work in EPIC very much builds on this context and background. And so just to give you a snapshot of that research, in 2020, we were commissioned by ISQ to write an issues paper, and that allowed us to go and have a look at what data was available from schools. And we particularly focused on schools that had written descriptions of what was happening for them during COVID. And the issues paper does a deep dive into the literature at that time, as well as highlighting the connections with our past EPIC work. And we commend that to you. That's really available. In 2021, we were enabled by this research to focus on 6 schools, and we did a deep dive with 2 of those schools. So we've actually been able to present 6 case studies in the 2021 report with some 4 illustrations of practice that are very detailed in that report. In 2022, our focus continued to be on teachers' practices, but we looked at groups of teachers in schools working collaboratively together. So I'm hoping that what we're presenting tonight really highlights this whole idea that our methodology methodology, as well as the methodology we encourage teachers and schools to use, has at its heart this whole idea of this collaborative work that we encourage our staff and teachers and school leaders to do alongside us as researchers, and indeed with our industry stakeholders such as the ISQ and QISPN that supports this work. So shifting from pedagogical practices and school processes, we've now moved to 2023 and a scaling up of this work where we're taking that learning now and working with parent engagement leadership teams, and which we affectionately call PELTs. And our PELTs include a parent. Strategically, every one of those PELTs has a parent who is recognised in that role as the parent on those parent engagement leadership teams, so that we've got the voice of the parents front and centre throughout this work. Thanks, Beryl. And there's a geographic representation of the work that we've done in EPIC, particularly since 2018. And you can see on the back of the work that we've done with other schools, we've got about 30 schools that we've been working in over that time. Thanks, Beryl. And so in terms of, oops, I've just lost you because my laptop closed, but I am assuming that you can still see and hear me. In terms
yes, we
of,
can, Linda. Yes.
Thanks so much. Just a little technical glitch. There's the picture of the issues paper. Again, that we encourage you to have a look at that to get a little bit more information and background about this work. And then on our next slide, there's the picture of our final report, our 2021 final report. And I'll hand over to Amanda now to talk about some other outputs from 2021.
Thanks, Linda. On your screen now, you'll see what we call our snapshots from EPIC. And this is basically a summary for the audience is primarily teachers and school leaders who want to really quickly get across the findings. Perhaps they don't have time to wade through the research reports, but they want to get to really the substance of some of the findings. And Linda and Beryl have done an amazing job with these 3 documents, breaking down the basics in terms of what we know about parent engagement, and then some ideas for teachers in the next document, and then ideas for school leaders. These are currently on a website for our member schools, but we're in the process soon of releasing these publicly, so I'd be happy to share those in time with you all. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Amanda. And each of our reports is around 60 pages in length, so they're light reading. But they're reading, that we feel proud of because of the detail that we've been able to include and because of the currency of this work. This work is done in 2021 or 2022, and at the end, we're actually able to produce a fairly substantive report each time. So in 2022, similarly, and the report also includes, apart from the general background and information about the schools, etc., it also includes some detailed illustrations of practice. In fact, 5 very detailed illustrations of practice of schools and teachers, and we believe that they're very useful for people to read, to get an understanding of just how this works on the ground. And Amanda?
Thanks, Linda. This is the 4th in our series of snapshots that Linda and Beryl have produced as a result of their research. And this one's called SOUP. And I think Beryl's going to explain some of the theory behind that soon. But again, this is meant to be an easily digestible document for professionals who may want to print this out and put it up in their staff room. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And I will just mention there, just back on that slide while I see it, because we might not have another opportunity, but frameworks like Change, which are just easy coat hangers that have emerged out of other work that we've done. The Change came out of the issues paper, and teachers have then found that this is a really good framework for their planning and so on. So in terms of EPIC, just what's EPIC? We really like the name EPIC, of course, because it's nice and catchy. But of course, there are some quintessential differences around this work that we call EPIC. So essentially, what EPIC is interested in is engaging every parent in every school to support their child or young person's learning and well-being in the home environment. That's our particular aim and goal, and we think it's an important one to think about engaging every student every parent and in every school. So in terms of the work around how we theorise EPIC, we often talk about 4 pillars. So to support this work, and we feel the theory is what sets this work apart, because often we dive in and find good examples of what's happening, but we don't know why. So the work that we do with EPIC is very much built on theory, and then that work, once our teachers and school leaders grasp that theory, then they implement it or take it on board in ways that are incredibly creative, but depending on their own contexts. So this is just a very quick picture of those pillars. The pillars, number 1, engaging parents, inquiry curriculum, affinity spaces, and cogenerative dialogues. And when we work with schools, particularly at the beginning, we really like to encourage them to know that we don't think it's a blank slate, that we know they're already doing incredibly important work and good work, and that they're a long way in their journey. So we actually help them to unpack where they might be in relation to these pillars. So what we want to do now is just to look at each of these in a bit more detail, and we'll support that with videos. So rather than spend a lot of time talking about each one, we'll talk a little bit, then show our videos, and then talk a little bit more. Thanks, Beryl. So this first one is this whole idea of engaging parents. And you can see that's my littlest, or one of my youngest grandsons there talking with his granddad. And you can see how engaged they are on reading together. So when we talk about parents, we do talk about parent from a biological parent or grandparent point of view, but also we use it as a catch-all term for family, guardians, carers, or other people with primary care and responsibility for a child's well-being. Sometimes it's families, sometimes it's elders, etc. We particularly use this whole idea of engaging parents as opposed to parent engagement. We flip it because we feel that the whole idea of engaging builds on the process, the verb, it's active, it's continuing, and it really is a nod to the whole idea of that this is a process, it's an ongoing journey, as opposed to a noun which might be more construed as a destination or a one-off event. So that's a point of difference around this work with parent engagement, with EPIC. You will hear us still say parent engagement, but we really flip it to that whole idea of engaging parents as a point of difference. Thanks, Beryl. And so I think very often we focus on this difference between involvement and engagement, where many of us who are in this field understand that involvement is around the idea of schools engaging parents in school, whereas engaging parents is that whole idea of shifting the equation so that the focus is on children and a child's learning, and it's shifting parents so that their focus is closer to their child's learning rather than school goals and so on. So much more direct than indirect.
Okay, so here's where we get to the exciting bit. This is where you get to meet some of the participants that we've interviewed who have been involved in EPIC previously. And this first video that we're going to see is from a school leader's perspective. It's Linda Evans, who is principal of Fairholme College in Toowoomba on the Darling Downs. And we'll see an example of engaging parents, but with an emphasis on curriculum. It's not just about keeping the parents busy, it's about bringing the parents closer to their child's learning. So we'll see Linda talk about the shift from involving parents to engaging parents. And we'll also see if you've got any questions or if there's anything you'd like to discuss, we welcome you to take note of that and bring it up in the Q&A at the end of the session. So Amanda, I'll stop sharing now and allow you to show this video.
Thanks, Beryl. And if Beryl, you can just give me a thumbs up when I've started playing, that you can hear that. I'll just share my screen.
Before EPIC, we were very comfortable with our level of parent engagement. What I realise now is we were very comfortable with volunteerism opportunities and event opportunities. But what EPIC has taught me is that it's so much more. It's about the engagement around curriculum, and that's been the big shift in my understanding. Teachers saying that your parents know a lot, and what they know is legitimate in this classroom, and we value it. We value their voice as well as your voice. I co-teach a Year 12 English class, and we were beginning a poetry unit, and I went in and I said to the girls, can you just email your parents now and ask them their favourite poem from school, and let's see what they get back. And they went, what, can we email them now? And I said, absolutely. And the answers just kept coming down. Oh, you know, my mother's replied, my father's replied. So there was a link and there was a legitimate conversation about curriculum that did not exist beforehand. And that is the power, is that parents, I think, are thirsty for positive engagement with their children. And because adolescence is what it is, there are often occasions where that is simply not possible. So where parents can link in on something that they know often a lot about, it's a really rich conversation with their son or daughter. I'd have to say that I'm unashamedly a convert to engaging parents in curriculum. It is in our new strategic plan that we are working on at the moment. It is in discussions around the leadership table. It is in discussions at staff meetings, and it is, which I like, more in those casual conversations in different contexts where I'll say, and so how are you going to engage parents in that? And that is a question I'm asking in every forum I'm sitting in. How are you inviting our parents into that conversation? And if you value parent voice, allow them in and listen, and give them those opportunities. The academic research that backs the project gives so much credibility to what we're doing. And the opportunity to sit, and it's been Zoom, but it's been very effective, to sit with Beryl and Linda every 2 weeks and hear them speak and hear them give examples from research or from other practitioners does give strength to the importance of engaging our parents in their child's learning. I am convinced of the power of that, and the power lies first and foremost in the thinking of the teacher, that here is an opportunity for me to create an even better learning environment for the students in my classroom or the students in this school. And it's just that sense of we're all in this together, and it's not just this private relationship between teacher and student, but it's much broader than that. And it is, as we know, culture is at its richest, you know, when it's broad and wide and deep. And this is deepening and broadening culture around learning.
Okay, always get goosebumps when I watch that video, because Linda has busted that myth that teenagers don't want their parents connected to their learning, and she's taken it through the whole school. Now, we couldn't have a project around engaging parents without hearing the parents' perspective. So here we're going to meet another parent from the EPIC projects, and we're going to hear what this parent has to say around the importance of inquiry curriculum. Now, Linda and I are very committed to inquiry. Inquiry, of course, it's on a continuum between traditional learning and teaching, where in the traditional mode, the teacher is the font of the knowledge and the teacher chooses the pacing and sequencing of the learning. Inquiry, on the other hand, starts with a genuine question to explore, and students co-plan with varying degrees of agency with the teacher. And here we're going to meet Pauline, a parent who has now participated in her young son's learning, and she's going to talk to us about what she's gotten out of the experience. Thanks, Amanda.
Classroom. The benefits to this project on my child specifically is he is so much more comfortable talking to me about different things that are happening at school. He's excited about different things. He's constantly asking me to come in and see something that he's done or something he wants to show me. He's not frightened that his teacher's going to talk to me. He's quite okay when she says she's going to email me or she's going to have a conversation with me after school, whereas previously he would have been terrified and would have been like really upset that somebody wanted to talk to me. And now he takes it that it's perfectly normal and it's okay that his teacher and his mum have a conversation and we talk about things together. And more importantly, the emotional benefit has been he's much calmer and he's much more self-assured in his position, I think, in the classroom and at home. And I think it creates like a little security blanket when you think that your parent and your teacher are friends rather than the teacher is going to call your mum and get you into trouble. And he absolutely loves when I get to come to the classroom and do things. He loves to come home and call his grandparents who live elsewhere to tell them all about what he's learnt and how it's so amazing. Just the importance of it, I think. The importance of having inquiry topics, even to the extent that after he did the Hero Project and the Marble Run, and we got to see just how inquiry topics actually fire in his brain, and he loves it. And we started doing different things at home, like building solar systems and doing lots of different science-based and trying to find out an answer to something without it being a set answer. He really thrives on that, and we've been able to use it to mould how he learns in other areas now and try and encourage that critical thinking in different aspects of school that he actually doesn't enjoy. And it's been really fun learning how to do that. And I don't think, without inquiry projects, I would never have known that that's how his brain works.
Okay, so what we've seen there from Pauline is an example of what happens when a school adopts inquiry curriculum as a project that takes place, for example, over a month or a school term. We've also found that inquiry curriculum can be taken up more as a micro approach, where it's just an instance of inquiry during a lesson, for example. Here we're going to meet a video about Mary. Mary is a middle school teacher, a middle school science teacher. And during a particular lesson, she just broke into a micro inquiry, invited the students to connect with their parents about something, and you'll get to see some of the examples of what the parents were able to furnish back into the classroom space to enrich everybody's learning. Thanks, Amanda.
As a result of EPIC, I am refreshed. I'm validated in my teaching. I feel really positive in my teaching, and it's been exactly what I needed at this point in my career. And I just feel really, really good about doing it and my skill to be able to do it. It doesn't just come naturally. I had to take a risk, basically. I had to feel a little bit uncomfortable to start, and once I could see the results of it, then I thought, oh yeah, I can do this, I'm right, I'm good to go now. I quickly realised with doing the EPIC program that perhaps I'm not engaging in curriculum with parents as much as I could be. I had a light bulb moment. So the trying was to send an email to the parents for our Year 7 physics unit. So the first initial question was, how are forces used in everyday contexts? At the end of that lesson, there was an email reply from a parent, and I went, whoa! I was a bit taken back. It was a video of a helicopter, mustering helicopter, landing in the front yard of the farmhouse, dust flying everywhere, and this is forces happening, and it was labelled with the different forces of the helicopter, and it was just blew me away, really. I thought, wow, this is exactly what this is about, obviously. And I was able to just engage straight back with the parent and reply with that, and yeah, and share it with the class, etc. as well. And yeah, that was the first moment I went, wow, this is good.
So they were getting that knowledge about forces, not from me, the teacher. It was actually being facilitated by the parent body now, because soon after that email came, the other emails came as well of another father videoed gravity in context, and suddenly we're all learning and all seeing the different forces in other people's workplaces at home. And yeah, I didn't need to say anything. It all just came forward through that natural approach of seeing parents as this great resource. My practice now, so it's 9 months later, I guess, it's now just sort of natural, and I'm finding that I'm doing and thinking as I'm planning and as I'm implementing things within the classroom or talking to other teachers. I'm suddenly having these little moments of, oh, I could use that, I can do that. So now it's just like natural within our room to email our parents about things. So it was just a whole rich culture there of where information can come from. So I've often been very worried about how I word my emails and everything. So I've tried to let that go a little bit, and I think I have with the project so far. It's helped me to do that, and they'll know I'm emailing in the middle of a class, and they're probably a lot more forgiving than I think. There's been a change in the atmosphere, I suppose, of the room, if you like, or the culture of the room. It's more natural to talk about what your parents might be doing, or and we know more about each other. So there's that, it's a little bit richer, if you like. There's that bit of strength there now because we have that tapestry of those different strings that have threaded across, and that's kind of really nice, safe sort of feeling. And I can sense that, and I can see that the students can sense that too. As parents, as teachers too, we get so busy, don't we? We tell people they're important, but we don't necessarily not able to show that. But this can show it in really small little ways, and I think I think the girls find that really lovely.
Thank you, Amanda. So another very rich example of how a teacher was able to bring the EPIC pillars as a micro-inquiry practice into her classroom. So the next EPIC pillar is affinity spaces. And affinity spaces was where Linda and I were starting to investigate all the sorts of places where this collaboration could happen. When we first started off EPIC back in 2018, we did call it social media because we wanted to see what were the affordances of virtual live spaces, given that we were responding to a lot of the dialogue around parents didn't have the time to come into classrooms like they used to come into classrooms. But we're also then, at that particular time, there was also some safety requirements released by the eSafety Commissioner that was starting to lock down students' access to virtual spaces where the server wasn't stored in Australia. And we were also working quite closely with schools about designing their processes and guidelines and agreements with having parents involved in these spaces for children's learning. So what we did was we did away with the term social media, and we introduced the term affinity spaces. So that way we could better represent physical spaces that, for example, might have been in the bus on the way to the excursion, that might have been in the car park, or might have been on the soccer field on a Saturday morning as children were playing sports, that might have been even in the tuck shop line when the children were lining up. And we also wanted to recognise the benefit of real-time, what we call synchronous communication, and asynchronous communication, such as emails and blog sites, where parents and carers and community members as contributors to learning would have their own timescale or timelines for engaging in these practices. Okay, so let's move to the next one. This is where we're going to meet. Linda, over to you, please.
Well, perhaps at this point, we actually have found affinity spaces to be one of the most powerful concepts, especially when we reflect with teachers who talk about how they've found some of the theory and how it's helped them then to think about what they do in practice. So picking up on what Beryl has said, and I guess asking you also to think back to the few videos that we've already shown, perhaps if you've got a pen and paper, you might want to think about the teacher and his thinking around, what was his thinking around the affinity spaces that were available to him to start to engage his students and also his parents in this example. So we have a lovely example here in the early years. We've been really careful to try and provide different examples from early and middle and senior secondary so that you get the sense of the work across the year levels. So thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Linda.
Well, as a Steiner class teacher in the primary school, we knew everything was based on relationships with students, but also relationships with parents. There's this concept that by having conversations with parents when there's no trouble, emotional banking it's called, so they're getting to know you, so that when things do happen you can make a withdrawal, you can have the parent in and it's less threatening because you already have a relationship developed. The EPIC program sort of brought more consciousness around the importance of the communication with parents and the relationship with parents, and instead of just being more informative about what I'm doing as a class teacher with their children, to start what are ways that I can engage them in the learning. One good example was I posed the question on the first day of the main lesson to the children, I wonder what the first building was, and why don't you ask your parents tonight? And I was just blown away because on the next day they came with things they'd downloaded from the net and all these different buildings from around the world. So it was a wonderful conversation, and I could see there'd been lovely dinner conversations around the table. One of the ways in which my practice has changed is consciousness around communicating with parents very effectively, and that is via an email that's sent out pretty well weekly, and it informs parents as to what's going on, but also highlights what's coming up and how they can be supportive of the work we're doing with the children. I often will have a parent say, thank you for sending the emails, it's been really helpful. Often when you put information out, you get nothing back, so it's been really nice to get a bit of acknowledgement that this has been helpful for them and their child's learning.
My name's Melissa. I'm a parent in Chris Jack's class, and it's been really nice as a parent actually being included on the journey that he's taking with EPIC and really seeing the little changes that he's made in the program, how it's impacted the parents and also the children. Chris has really worked on his communication with parents, and that is so important from a parent perspective, and that's really helped build this connection between myself as a parent and Chris as a teacher, but also our child as well. He's been very clever in his communication, so not just telling us what the children are doing in the classroom, but he's giving us this, I suppose, holistic picture of they're doing this, this is how it looks in the classroom, and this is why they're doing it, so including the part of the philosophy. I feel it's helped Percy in the classroom build the confidence to talk about what he's doing, and not necessarily just at the dinner table, but it's also in the car, perhaps with his brother and sister, and I've noticed with his peers as well, he's a bit more engaging in what he's doing. I suppose the skill set to communicate what's happening in his life, and school is so much of his life. So it's given it a positive twist. I absolutely can see that. And it's really, this year I've seen him really grow as a child.
By engaging parents in a more conscious way, I think the children gain a lot more. It becomes the learnings not just about the classroom, but learning goes way beyond the classroom into the home, into society. And I think that also demonstrates that we work together, the parent and the teacher work together for the benefit of the children. I think one of the important things as a teacher is to reflect on your practice, and that applies to parent engagement. Try something, if it works, celebrate, and if it doesn't work, go back to the drawing board and try something different. And over the years, you'll get a whole tool bag of what works well with parents. My advice to other teachers regarding parent engagement would be communicate regularly with your parents, get to know them as best as you can, and engage them in the learning process of their children.
Thanks, Amanda. That lovely example of Chris Jack and the parent. We highlighted that one because it was one that we featured in the EPIC 2022 report. particularly because Chris talked a lot about, and he's not unusual, around the theory around that affinity spaces. And when he thought about that and applied it to his regular practice, he started to strengthen some of his already very good practices. So you heard him there talking about communication. He particularly used, if you were taking notes or having a brainstorm there as you were watching, that whole idea of email. He used that really, really powerfully. The children at home over the dinner table, they're hopping on the internet with parents. He facilitated that in the way that he provided examples and opportunities for the class. Then the parent talked to us about the car ride home, not just over the dinner table, the peer-to-peer conversations, the conversations between parents and the teacher sitting there perhaps at a parent-teacher interview and so on. And interestingly, when those children did build their buildings, instead of just allowing that to happen, he communicated back to the parents about the different sorts of techniques and things that the students had come up with. And then the students took those to the library and displayed them there. And the parents, not only in that class, but the rest of the school were invited in again as an affinity space to see and to celebrate the children's learning. So we often, with this work, we often find that there's a big announcement at the beginning, an excursion and something at the end, but not the learning along the way. And the power of this work with EPIC has been around teachers thinking about where are those opportunities every day in regular ways. So on that note, I'll hand over to Beryl.
Thanks, Linda. So Amanda talked about some of the outputs that have resulted from some of the EPIC projects. And as researchers, Linda and I, our job is to step back from all of these case studies and then abstract what is it that makes each of these case studies work. Even though they're different, what's the theoretical point of commonality across these case studies? And we found that all of these examples of parent engagement weren't EPIC. So EPIC doesn't need to be epic. What we found was that these opportunities to engage parents in their child's learning were often short and sharp. The invitations were issued often and they were always optional, that there might be some points in time where parents did have the capacity or the clear time to click back and reply, or it might have been that the content wasn't a good fit for the parents' vocational knowledge or hobby knowledge, or it might have been that the parent was waiting for something else that they really felt that they had deep knowledge around. And then we also know that it's important that they are purposeful, that the time that the parents put in yields a benefit to the classroom, but also yields a benefit to their student as well, and that it's personalised. So we've taken those dot points, short, sharp, often optional, with purpose and personalised, and that's what we call our SOUP framework. When we're sitting down and planning with teachers, we don't ask teachers to throw out the units that they know and that they love. We're asking teachers how can they bring a SOUP framework to tweak their existing practices. Okay, so let's meet another teacher who's working with affinity spaces at the macro level. This is Jay Ross from Fairholme College again, and Jay's going to talk about a secondary school. Really important that we're seeing ways that secondary schools can open up conversations between teenagers and their families. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Beryl.
I'm a different teacher due to EPIC because I think now I value parents and what they can bring into my classroom far more than I have ever done before. I've always thought my classroom is me and my girls and the work that I can present to them and the ideas that they can bring into the classroom. And now I think I'm a much better teacher because, of course, those girls are products of their homes and they are products of their families' values and beliefs and opinions, and it's so good now to respect that. Before being involved in EPIC, I probably didn't really think that there was a place for parents in curriculum. We've probably had quite a lot of conversations over the years about how we could keep them out of curriculum, because every now and then a parent, or we suspect a parent, writes a student's assignment for them. So it's been really good doing EPIC, because it's totally changed the way not only I see parents engaging in curriculum, but quite a few other staff. From being quite a negative idea to something that's we now view as really quite positive. At Fairhome, part of our Year 7 studies for a number of years has been to hold what we call GabFest at the end of Term 1. And it's really a culminating activity for the English and Humanities tasks, where I have a little morning tea, and the parents have always been invited, but we've never before thought to ask them to share anything. But when we first talked about EPIC, and I realised that it was about little tweaks that you could do to involve parents in curriculum, it just suddenly came to me, I think even during the meeting, that I could ask the parents to share their own anecdote. And then on the day, the 100 Year 7s and their family who were visiting, we gave them time to talk and to share their anecdotes. So I just sort of sat there and held my breath when that bit happened in the program. And then I looked around and I could see girls and their mums and dads and their grandparents in some cases just talking and sharing their anecdotes. And I could see some parents pulling out bits of paper from their pockets, and I could see girls reading and laughing and talking. I could see the joy on everybody's faces that they were really enjoying those conversations. And I just thought, wow, that was really easy for me to do. It was really just a few more lines in the invitation, and made it far more interesting for the parents, because otherwise they really were just sitting as sort of part of an audience. It just made the event so much better. We do have a school culture here where parents want to be involved, and I think this has given them an avenue to be involved in a way that is helping the classroom, helping their daughter, helping their teacher. It's demonstrating to the girls that their parents have value, their parents' opinions have value, and that there's learning to be had both at home and at school.
Thanks, Amanda. So we've got the case here of Jay, where Jay has found an affinity space that already existed. She'd already done a lot of the work around setting up the GabFest, setting up the project, and her investment was just adding a few extra lines to that invitation to then create this situation where classroom learning wasn't strongly bounded as a relationship between the teacher and the students, but learning became boundless and extended out into these reverberating conversations with parents and carers and other community members in an existing event. Now, Jay also spoke about the dialogue that happens, so I'll pass over to Linda now to talk about the fourth EPIC pillar, co-generative dialogue.
Thanks so much, Beryl. And we've seen it so well illustrated throughout all of our examples, this whole idea of conversation, and it really does carry the work of EPIC, where we teach our participants around about co-generative dialogue. So obviously we understand the nature of dialogue as being two-way. Co-generative, built from words like collaboration and cooperative, etc. But that whole idea of generative being that you can bring an idea, I can bring an idea, and together as we're listening and learning, we get a new idea that wasn't yours or mine, but becomes ours together. And the conversation and the ideas continue and expand. And once understanding that aspect of this work, we find that as our participants start to think about affinity spaces, they start to think about where those conversations can become co-generative. And it's certainly very much a part of the work that we do. It permeates, as I indicated before, every aspect of the work, whether it's working with our participants or whether it's the way that we work methodologically as well. And these are just a few pictures of the work where we highlight this co-generative work. We're encouraging rich, substantive conversations about planning, about teaching and learning, and where listening is probably more important than even talking, and helping our participants to think about how those conversations honour and respect all of the voices equally. So we've got examples here of a principal working with a cultural leader. We've got example in the bottom, my left corner, where a school is working on collaboratively planning the work ahead with a big vision and values project. In the top corner, we've got a teacher in the middle surrounded by two parents and a pre-service teacher, and that's my PhD research. And then down the bottom, you've got a collection of teachers working with Beryl and I online in this work. So this whole idea of collaborative dialogues, as I said, is very much a pillar of the work that we do. And Jay, and my laptop's collapsing again. Jay showed us an example at a macro level. We're going to have a look at one, and this is our final video, at a micro level, which again focuses on a teacher's practice and how he's instituted this whole idea of thinking about these two-way conversations, how the conversation is initiated and continued, and it becomes reciprocal and organic through the work that he does, and very, very deliberately to encourage this ongoing conversation about learning. Thanks so much, Amanda.
Thanks, Linda.
What the EPIC project gave to me was some cold, hard data and advice on how to improve the communications and the actual tangible benefits of the interactivity between parents. That didn't really require much more work, just changing the way I worked to bring those parents in. And it's had a marked improvement on some students' responses. If they can hold a conversation about a topic knowledgeably, and the more they practice those conversations, the more likely they are to be able to understand and to engage from different angles. And if they practice those at home, then they're getting twice as much exposure than just in a 1.5 hour lesson each day. Often it's small, simple things like sending a response home after every lesson, not just each week. Giving the parents an indication of what we've covered in class and what they can ask their students. By furnishing the parents with this information, they can ask those direct questions, and then the conversation starts. As a high school teacher, I cover class 7 through 12. Both sets of parents have come back to me to say how valuable understanding what their students doing in the school has been for them. And because they know that, they can support what we do in the classroom at home as well. It does become a very organic process when it works in that way, which isn't with every student or with every family, but when it does, you almost find that you don't feel like you've done anything, and the student doesn't feel like they're doing anything different, the parent doesn't feel like they're doing anything different, but something different has happened nonetheless. I kind of feel that the parent engagement program is in some ways something that shouldn't need to be said, because it just makes sense. Of course it's going to help if families have the capacity to engage and to support their child, but that's not always the case, and it's not always in the front of people's minds when they're doing lesson plans and program plans. You're thinking about your students, and you're thinking about your behaviour management, you're thinking about your content, you're thinking about your assessment, your curriculum, and you often forget about the home. So what this has done is provide focus into the home, provide focus into these other areas, and just by being cognizant of that, it's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you include it?
And so well said there by Andy at Sanford Valley Steiner School. That whole idea of not just letting it happen, but planning for it purposefully. So he was a great example of someone, when he developed his planning, he actually thought about parent engagement and infused it throughout his work. So it wasn't an add-on or something extra. It just became part and parcel of his regular practice. Because he had already thought about it with his planning. Obviously, that allowed for spontaneous opportunities as well throughout, but that conscious thinking about it as something that was critical to his work was a change in his practice. And so just a few brief slides to finish off some of our key findings from EPIC 2022. Engaging parents involves teachers and school leaders letting parents know why they matter, and about the power of everyday conversations to improve their child's school and life success, then scaffolding parents to support their child's learning and well-being in ways that are natural, authentic, and fun. School leaders actively contributed to practice and research, formally and informally, throughout EPIC 2022. They embraced their roles as change agents, while simultaneously playing equally important roles as facilitators, co-teachers, sounding boards, and cheerleaders alongside teachers in the work of parent engagement. Against the backdrop of doing school, the participants showed how often small changes in parent engagement practice were quickly rewarded with noticeably enhanced student learning and engagement, teaching effectiveness and teacher satisfaction, so going back to that Victoria survey, and collective and community well-being.
We also found that the research showed that parents of children of all ages were often waiting in the wings. They just needed to be invited into their child's learning in a way that worked for them. Teachers and school leaders became more conscious, mindful and reflective about parent engagement, and subsequently adopted more deliberate parent engagement practices. They articulated the value of heuristics such as change, which you will find in the reports that we've shared with you, and inquiry models when planning for engaging parents. They also embraced mnemonics like SOUP, a short, sharp, often optional with purpose and personalised learning, and concepts such as closing the loop and who's at the table when developing and interrogating or filtering effective parent engagement practices. There are so many useful parent engagement frameworks. However, most lack an interconnected theoretical base that clearly aligns with practice. EPIC's theoretical framing and practical focus evidently provides a strong foundation for schools, teachers, and researchers to drive knowledge creation and pedagogical change.
Thank you. And now it's time for questions or discussion.
Thank you, Linda, Beryl and Amanda. That was really great presentation. If anybody has questions, you can pop them in the chat or the Q&A and we'll answer them as they come up. I'm not seeing anything pop up there at the moment, but somebody more techie than I may.
Is there anything anyone would like to just talk about?
Pete, if you can unmute everybody, that would be cool.
Just bear with me and I'll do that now.
So if you have been unmuted and you have a question for any of our presenters tonight, please maybe pop your hand up.
Helen has a question.
Thanks so much, Helen. I think it's certainly gained momentum since we've been able to work so closely with our stakeholders, ISQ and QIS Parents Network. But I do think that it's a topic that's often a vexed topic for schools and teachers, and it's one that really is something that teachers are really interested and keen to know. I guess sometimes people are looking for tricks and tips and easy fixes. And what we've been able to show that it is actually quite easy, but the theory actually facilitates that in the end, as opposed to just send home an email at the beginning of each week, perhaps, and then do nothing else. That we've actually showed how teachers work the space on the back of the theory. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but certainly starting the process, I think schools are much more keen and interested now as they see the success of other schools.
So Peter, Jeanette has her hand up. Can you unmute her? I just tried.
Jeanette is already unmuted. She needs to take her mic off mute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think, has that happened now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can, Jeanette.
Okay. I'm not sure how to frame the question, but I'm very excited by the work that you've done I run a workshop engaging culturally diverse parents from culturally diverse backgrounds. So I suppose my question, the lens I'd look through it is, in the process of doing the research, was there any feedback on if you're engaging parents from different cultural backgrounds, how that sort of blends into this?
Yeah, absolutely. That's been a part of the work that we've done. We'll often find that parents will come from diverse backgrounds, students from diverse backgrounds, whether it's language or other aspects. And I think this work very much lends itself to that work. It's again being able to engage those parents and being able to engage them where they're at, if you like. I mean, I know there are some schools, for example, some wonderful examples where they might invite parents in to be reading, learning how to read, for example, and working alongside parents in that way. I think parent workshops on the skills, focusing on the skills and the knowledges that that parents need, has been a vein that some schools have tapped into, and then being able to build the capacity of the parents, which then builds their confidence and their skills and their knowledge to then be able to assist their children more with their work. So I've certainly seen a lot of that kind of work happening in other studies, and certainly in terms of the work with EPIC, we certainly do encourage our schools to be very aware of those differences. So you heard some of those teachers tonight talk around the conversations as they flow back into the classroom. And so teachers who are aware that their parents identify culturally and linguistically differently from mainstream, that those stories that come back, different language, different ideas that get shared in the classroom, that they are honoured and respected. And because the children are talking about those different aspects of their culture in a very safe environment, because the conversations have been encouraged, teachers are saying that when they close the loop with their classes, because you can put a question out there but not actually ask the children the next morning, well, what did you talk about at home, or did you talk about that at home with mum and dad? Sometimes you can just put it out there and then never pick up on that thread. So that whole idea of picking up on that thread has translated with teachers saying to us that there's this greater sense of collective well-being, a sense of difference, a sense of honouring that difference, and understanding that everyone comes from a different home life, perhaps, or that different practices and traditions are honoured in their peers' homes, for example. So we certainly have seen that happening quite a lot in this work.
Thank you.
And Linda, I was going to say that if the invitations are short and sharp, often and optional with purpose and personalised, that means parents they're not becoming the at-home teacher. They're not teaching exponential equations to their Year 10 students. It's an invitation to contribute to the conversation of the learning, where parents feel as though they can make that contribution. So it might be that a parent comes into the classroom and does a very short talk for those that feel as though they've got something to offer and feel comfortable with that invitation. Sometimes it's the parents just photographing something in the community, and they can decide how comprehensive the written response is that accompanies that photograph as well. Sometimes it's not parents engaging in a public way. Sometimes they're private conversations. And we saw examples of those more private conversations with the video of Jay Boss at the Gabfest at Fairhome, where parents sat down with their children to talk about something they'd been invited to talk about. So whether the parents talked in home language or whether they talked in standard English was completely up to them. It was that there were lots of invitations. They were all little, but they happened often. So if parents miss that great big launch event, or they miss the great big celebration event, there was still a trickle of invitations to contribute not only to their child's learning, but to everybody's learning along the way.
Beryl and Linda, I don't know whether you can see the chat, but there are a few questions in there. Would you like me to read them out, or can you actually see the chat questions?
I can see them. I see that Stephen has asked a question about, have we experienced some resistance from schools and teachers, and what are the factors that lead to it if you have? I think that's actually an easy question to answer, Stephen, because yes, we have certainly experienced resistance, not so much ourselves personally, but others trying to implement this work, maybe school leaders, for example, and very often the resistance actually comes from teachers. And I think a lot of it is that teachers perceive this as just like they're already stretched to breaking point, and this is just going to be more work, and workload is a particular issue. But what we have found with this work is that teachers say, oh my goodness, it was actually a small amount of effort for a big gain in the end. But of course, getting past that is often a challenge. So I was talking about it with one of the participants today in relation to EPIC 2021 report. One of those schools has actually talked about they were on this journey. And I don't know that we actually identified it as teacher resistance, but reading between the lines, what that school did, the model that they did in terms of going with the early adopters, the people who are happy and willing to engage, and then continuing to expand that circle of people who are seeing the results, seeing those successes, seeing the enjoyment and satisfaction, it sort of catches on. So they really provided an excellent model around this work, and we're not going to sugarcoat it and say that there is, that you won't encounter some issues. So the answer is yes. But I think a lot of it is that we often, teachers go into classrooms, but they actually aren't always prepared with this. So for these ways of operating, because they haven't seen it or they haven't experienced it themselves, which is why we're very, very much committed to the idea that we need to influence our initial teacher education programs to be able to provide these kinds of rich examples of this work, as opposed to a teacher-parent interview or just hosting a barbecue and then a bigger, better barbecue. Really helping our pre-service teachers to understand the importance of this work and how it can just become part and parcel of their regular practice. That writing a diary entry, once or twice a fortnight or once a week, that an email out to all parents to invite them to share some aspect of their family life, etc., is just as simple or simpler than perhaps the diary entry that many teachers are committed to sort of doing. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad practice, but a lot of time that's a lot of work for teachers. And then, the resistance is a bit unfounded sometimes in the light of how they could, adopt a simple practice which will achieve as much or more. So much more to talk about. Natasha, the positive effects on staff, executives and the schools outside the students. I think, and Beryl, you might like to comment more, but I do think the first video we saw of Linda Evans at Fairholme College, she is an absolute perfect example of how she has just embraced this work, and that it certainly has had a ripple effect on the school, because the teachers have a lot of opportunity to talk about what they're doing, to share what they're doing, to share their excitement and enthusiasm. And we have had some teachers who certainly come into the project and they're certainly not convinced. They're actually anti, but with the benefit of us working with them, sharing examples and then trying things, they immediately start to think, actually, there's something in this. And I'm actually feeling a lot better about my teaching, and I'm actually feeling a lot better about the culture of the school, and so on. So schools even thinking about places and parking and spaces, especially post-COVID, where, we've tended to sort of keep parents away, and schools having to look at those, the design of their school and think about, well, how can we make this be a lot more comfortable and safe to support parents to come back into school, to allow for those lingering conversations, frequent conversations, spontaneous conversations. So I think there's work to be done there post-COVID as well. But we certainly are seeing changes in culture and school climate as a result of this work. Beryl?
We've heard from the teachers that there's a time efficiency with the EPIC approaches, that the effort expended was exceeded by the yield gained. And we've also heard teachers say that, look, there were still some issues that had to be addressed, but what EPIC did was it opened up the relationship bank account. So when an issue did rear, that teachers were in a better position to then have those conversations with the parents and the students as well. So we're not saying do away with your parent involvement practices. If your parent involvement practices serve important purposes around connection, around parents supporting parents, around wrapping around support where support is needed, getting jobs in schools done, for example, like tuck shop and covering the library books and all those sorts of things, please keep doing all of that. What EPIC is talking about is ways of tweaking existing units, tweaking existing practices, using existing media, using affinity spaces that are at your offering. And we're talking about small tweaks that yield results.
And I'll also add that some of our schools who are with us for a third year now with this longitudinal work, some of them are now taking the ideas and thinking about what's happening at that macro level, looking at their vision and mission statements, for example, and really having a think around how they look at their strategic planning and those big picture ways of working. And then knowing that if they get that right, so this is what one principal said to us recently, if we can get that to be, that overarching hanger, if you like, they then said that they can see that will filter into those micro practices. So they're actually taking us on this journey. I think that's the really delicious part of our work as researchers, is that we're just not sort of making this up. We're actually really listening to what our schools are teaching us. We're watching them, we're working with them, and they're saying, okay, now we're ready to have another look at what we're doing at the macro level, because we can see then we're going to have more push through at that micro level.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I'm not sure that there are any more questions in the chat box. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to pop their hand up? We can have you unmute yourself. So Natalie's just popped a question up there.
Yes, that's the question we get a lot. It's unfortunately dependent on funding because it comes at a cost, especially because we wanted to research around it. We're also thinking about other sources of funding, and that's ongoing conversation. But for schools who want to get started and want to get started straight away, I commend the reports to you because they've got a really rich range of case studies that as you read them, you will come to understand the philosophies of the school and decide which of those philosophies align with your existing context and your existing practice, and thinking about what out of those examples could come into our space, what out of those theoretical frameworks that we've shared with you. So today we've shared with you the 4 EPIC pillars around engaging parents, inquiry, curriculum, affinity spaces and cogenerative dialogue. We've also shared with you around the pedagogical framework or the strategy around short, sharp, often optional, with purpose and personalised. And if that gives you confidence to move ahead, that's a way that you can start these sorts of your journey free, where you don't need us to do it. And Linda, I'm reflecting on one of our schools, I think it might have been 2018, where we worked with the school for 12 months. And at the beginning of the next year, the teachers had taken it upon themselves to plan a PD at their school without us, which we think is the hallmark of success, and frame up what they've done and present that to their colleagues at their school with the idea of them getting buy-in for the rest of the teachers.
And again, that's the beauty of the work this year, is that the parent engagement leadership team, a team of 6 or 7 with representatives from sometimes also admin, school admin involved, media officers, as well as teachers, school leaders and parents. The whole idea of that is also to see how our schools might then use that model as a vehicle to then create that culture and move this work forward, without necessarily having Beryl and I being the critical friends, but having the critical friends on hand within the resource that's been created within the parent engagement leadership teams and going forward. Yes, certainly we do commend you starting on the journey, and we suggest start small, start where you feel confident, and adopt some of these practices, because we know that you're already on the journey. We know that.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for participating tonight. Linda, Beryl and Amanda, thank you so much for your presentation. It's been really wonderful. We all here know how important the journey of engaging parents is, and I really like that you've flipped that term around, that it's no longer just parent engagement, it's a continual. So engaging with parents is a really nice terminology there. And yeah, I think it's really important that we get the message across to teachers especially, but to school leaders as well, the benefits of having that engagement ongoing with your families, and also that it's not an add-on. It is just something that should be embedded in your everyday practice, and it will make life so much easier and bring such great results to the school, to the children overall. So terrific message, and it's great that those schools are ploughing ahead with that, doing really well. So once again, thank you for your time. I'm conscious we have run over time, so sorry for holding you up, everybody, but I think it was well worthwhile. And yeah, thank you very much again for being with us. Good night.
Thanks so much. Goodbye, everyone.
Right. Just waiting to see who's left.
Yeah, just thought I'd just stay and say thank you so much. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Di.
No, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Yeah, well, I thought it went really well, didn't it? Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, and I know that, and we'll feed back to you too the further hits on our YouTube, because I know that there are people that still do want to see it. So yeah, that'll be great. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Di. That's fabulous. Get the word out.
Yes.
Yeah, spread the good oil. We can't keep it all to ourselves.
And I'm looking forward to those sheets, Amanda. I know a couple of schools already that are looking for just quick how-tos. And you don't want them to do quick how-tos. I keep telling them it's not a quick fix, people, but even something, it's that sort of like that force field analysis. If you can get a couple of runs on the board, then other people will start to come on board. And I think that's what they're after. So yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think the power of the snapshots is just breaking down something that seems big into easily digestible bits, and that's what Linda and Beryl have done with those snapshots. So yeah, I'm just in the process of getting approval to get them released publicly, because they've been behind our website paywall for a little bit. So just leave that with me for a bit, and I'll come back to you when they're ready to go.
Okay, that sounds awesome. What was good about your video clips too, though, was that sorry, I should really shut up and go, shouldn't I? And talk to. I just thought the video clips were great, in the sense that it gave someone's journey, and it validated it for all different levels. You talk to high school people and they go, oh, we can't do it up here and it's impossible, and kids don't want their parents there. And we know that. I mean, there's research at Sydney Uni that says the same thing. We've been preaching this stuff for ages, but seems to be a convenient excuse sometimes. But anyway, that was just me being a critic.
Really good. Well, we think the theory is really what makes the difference, Di. And we were a bit shy of co-generative dialogue. I mean, it sounds a bit of a mouthful. It's not a word you use in regular speak. Affinity spaces, there's another one. But we found that it's actually caught on with our participants, and that's why we use it, because they get it. And that's what's been really quite powerful, that once they get it and, you know, they're intelligent, they're teachers, and they then think, oh, I could apply that here, there, or, you know, and that's what's really made the difference. So we think often we focus too much on something's working, but we don't know why. But when we can theorise it, wow, we can do a lot more.
I just wanted to add my thanks to Di and Sharon for having us as your guests. It's really a privilege for us to be here. So thank you again.
Oh no,
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
the thanks are
lovely.
ours. Okay, well
Yeah.
I'll let
Thank
you
you,
all go
Amanda.
and
Bye-bye.
take care, and we'll talk
Hope your
again soon.
building's not too spooky there, Amanda.
Yeah,
yeah,
wish
Get
me
out
luck.
safely.
Wish me luck.
Take care, Amanda.
See you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
hold on to your
Bye.
phone. Okay. Good night. Good
Bye
night.
bye. Thank you.
Bye.